There is a quiet threshold inside every human life, a moment when the familiar surface begins to thin and the deeper layers underneath start to show. Most of us sense this threshold long before we are willing to cross it. We feel it as an uneasiness, a subtle restlessness, a suspicion that the life we are living is not quite aligned with the life that wants to emerge from within us. Nietzsche understood this feeling intimately. To him, this restlessness was not a flaw, it was a sign of life, a sign that something within us was refusing to settle for inherited meanings, refusing to be shaped entirely by expectations that were never ours to begin with. He believed that the modern person often drifts through existence half awake, following routines, repeating beliefs, performing identities, not because they are dishonest, but because society teaches us early on that it is safer to blend in than to stand apart. Nietzsche invites us to look at this quiet conformity without judgment. He asks us to notice how often we choose comfort over authenticity, how often we silence a thought because it feels too risky, how often we defer to others because we fear the weight of our own independence. He did not see the individual as a fixed shape. He saw each person as a dynamic becoming, shaped by both internal forces and external pressures. Most of us, he suggested, live our early lives in the orbit of others. We revolve around expectations. We seek validation. We gather approval as though it were oxygen. We learn to survive by being what others need us to be, but survival is not the same as living. Nietzsche believed that the journey toward a meaningful life begins the moment we recognize this difference. There is a quiet honesty in admitting that much of what we call ourselves was never chosen. Our preferences, our beliefs, our ambitions, even our fears, they often carry the fingerprints of the world that raised us. Nietzsche does not condemn this. He simply asks us to recognize it, because until we understand what has shaped us, we cannot decide what still belongs to us. We cannot choose which parts of ourselves feel true and which were merely inherited. To confront this distinction requires solitude, not loneliness, not isolation, but the spacious, reflective solitude in which a person can hear their own voice. Nietzsche valued this solitude not as an escape from the world, but as a return to oneself. Without it, he believed, the individual becomes an echo rather than a voice, a reflection rather than a presence. Many people fear solitude because it exposes the internal noise we spend much of our lives avoiding. In the quiet, we hear our doubts more clearly. We feel our longing more sharply. We notice how often we have betrayed our own truth in the name of acceptance. Nietzsche believed that this confrontation, painful as it can be, is one of the great turning points in a human life. It is the moment when a person begins to take responsibility for their experience rather than simply reacting to the forces around them. Responsibility, in his view, was a form of empowerment. It was the reclaiming of agency, the refusal to remain passive in the face of one's own life. Nietzsche saw resentment as the natural result of denied agency. When people feel unable to shape their experiences, they turn inward with bitterness or outward with blame. They become trapped in a cycle of comparison, judgment, imagined injury. He described resentment as a silent sickness, a distortion of the soul that arises when a person feels too powerless to express their true desires or too frightened to pursue them. The cure for this sickness is not comfort, it is self-honesty. It is the willingness to admit our vulnerability, our jealousy, our disappointment, our longing, our fractured hopes. Nietzsche knew that people rarely resent out of malice. They resent because they feel unseen, unheard, unimportant, unable to act on the life that calls to them. When we recognize this truth within ourselves, the bitterness begins to soften. It loosens its grip. It becomes possible to step out of the small world that resentment builds and into a wider sense of possibility. Nietzsche often wrote about the idea of becoming who you are. At first, the phrase seems contradictory. How can one become something they already are? But he meant something subtle. He believed that each person carries a deeper, more essential self beneath layers of adaptation, fear, social conditioning. Becoming who you are is the process of peeling back these layers, not to arrive at a perfect identity, but to create an honest one. It is not a discovery of a fixed essence, It is the cultivation of a living truth. This idea places the individual in a continuous act of creation. Nietzsche did not believe that meaning lies hidden in the world waiting to be uncovered. He believed that meaning is formed through living, through choosing, through engaging with existence fully and consciously. Many people wait for clarity before acting. They wait for certainty before speaking. They wait for permission before changing. Nietzsche suggests that this waiting is often a disguised form of fear. Clarity is rarely a precondition for action. It is often its result. He believed that uncertainty is not something to be eliminated but embraced. Life, in his view, is not meant to be navigated with a perfect map. It is meant to be explored. To walk without absolute certainty is not a failure, it is the essence of being human. When we stop demanding guarantees, we become more capable of engaging with the moments in front of us. We become more resilient, more adaptable, more present. Of course, embracing uncertainty does not mean acting impulsively. Nietzsche valued thoughtfulness. He valued depth, but he also understood that too much introspection without action becomes stagnation. He wanted individuals to think deeply and then step into the world with what they discovered, to live from the inside outward rather than from the outside inward. Many people misinterpret Nietzsche as celebratory of ego or grandiosity. Yet, at the heart of his philosophy lies a compassionate realism about the human condition. He understood the fragility of the inner life. He knew how easily people become discouraged, how easily they internalize judgment, how quietly they lose confidence in their own perceptions. His writings often serve as a mirror, inviting us to look closely at the subtler movements of our inner world. He teaches that strength is not the absence of vulnerability. It is the willingness to face vulnerability without fleeing from it. It is the courage to hold the complexity of one's experience without collapsing into either despair or denial. He believed that individuals become stronger not by avoiding discomfort, but by moving through it with awareness. This movement requires patience. Real transformation is slow, uneven, filled with reversals and uncertainty. Nietzsche compared the process to the growth of a tree. A tree does not rush. It does not force its development. It grows according to its nature, in response to its environment, through seasons of nourishment and seasons of struggle. Its strength is the cumulative result of storms endured and roots deepened. Likewise, a person becomes themselves through enduring their own seasons, through learning from moments of confusion, heartbreak, disappointment, awakening, through recognizing the patterns that hold them back and slowly loosening those patterns until new ways of being become possible. This is not a linear path. It is a spiral, returning again and again to the same themes with deeper understanding. Nietzsche believed that suffering, when faced with honesty, has the potential to awaken the deeper layers of the self. He did not romanticize pain. He acknowledged its difficulty, its heaviness, its power to overwhelm. But he also saw how suffering strips away illusions, how it reveals what truly matters, how it forces us to confront aspects of ourselves we might otherwise avoid. He wrote that those who have suffered deeply often have a broader vision of life. They see things others overlook. They feel things others cannot access. They understand the fragility and the resilience of the human spirit in a way that comes only through experience. This does not mean that suffering is inherently noble. It means that our response to suffering shapes us. It means that when hardship enters our lives, we have the choice to become smaller through it or to grow through it. Growth does not happen immediately. Often, in the midst of pain, the possibility of growth is invisible. Nietzsche encourages us to trust that the meaning may emerge later, that the seeds planted in darkness often take the longest to bloom. In this sense, his philosophy becomes a companion in times of uncertainty. It reminds us that periods of transition are not failures. They are invitations to examine the life we are living, the beliefs we have inherited, the fears we carry, the desires we have denied. Invitations to ask whether the path we are on is truly ours or simply the path of least resistance. The challenge, Nietzsche suggests, is not to create a perfect life. The challenge is to create an honest one, a life that reflects our values rather than the values imposed on us. a life that feels aligned with our inner truth rather than shaped by the expectations around us. This alignment requires discernment. It requires us to feel deeply. It requires us to listen inward, even when the external world is loud. He understood that the fear of judgment is one of the greatest obstacles to authenticity. Many people live in the shadow of imagined disapproval. They silence their true thoughts. They hide their vulnerability. They suppress their creativity. They walk through life with a quiet apology for who they are. Nietzsche urges us to examine this fear with compassion rather than shame. He reminds us that most forms of judgment are reflections of the judging person's own fears and insecurities. When we internalize their perspectives, we inherit their limitations. True independence, he suggests, emerges when we learn to trust our own perception. This does not mean rejecting all external input. It means learning to evaluate it, to notice which voices resonate with our inner experience and which do not, to treat our intuition as a legitimate source of guidance rather than a source of embarrassment. Over time, this trust becomes a foundation. It becomes the inner ground upon which a meaningful life can be built. Without it, we drift. With it, we navigate. Nietzsche believed that the individual must become a creator, not necessarily in the artistic sense, but in the existential sense. To be a creator is to take responsibility for shaping one's inner life. It is to recognize that meaning does not arrive ready-made. It is formed through choices, commitments, interpretations. When we create meaning intentionally, we no longer feel at the mercy of circumstances. We become participants in our own becoming. This creation is not a one-time act. It is an ongoing practice, a daily orientation toward awareness, toward honesty, toward alignment. Some days it is easy, other days it feels impossible, but each day offers a chance to choose again. Nietzsche often described the self as a set of tensions between fear and courage, conformity and individuality, past and future, longing and restraint. These tensions do not need to be resolved. They need to be held. They point toward the complexity of human experience. A person who denies their tensions becomes rigid. A person who explores them becomes expansive. To live expansively is not to seek constant novelty. It is to engage deeply with the present. It is to allow the quiet details of life to speak. It is to sit with oneself without the constant need for distraction. Nietzsche believed that most people avoid themselves because they fear what they might find. But when we approach our inner life with gentleness rather than judgment, we discover that our fears often hide our most tender truths. There is a delicate strength in this tenderness. It reveals what we value, what we yearn for, what we cannot allow ourselves to lose. Nietzsche encourages us to treat these insights as precious. They are the compass of the soul. Through solitude and reflection, we begin to sense an inner orientation that does not depend on the shifting opinions of others. This orientation becomes a quiet guide. It alerts us when we are betraying ourselves. It nudges us toward decisions that feel aligned. It whispers when something is off. The more we listen, the clearer it becomes. So, as this inner clarity grows, we start to see how much of our suffering came from trying to be someone we were never meant to be. We see how often we exhausted ourselves by performing roles that were misaligned with our nature. We see how often we chose silence when we needed expression, how often we chose compliance when we needed boundaries, how often we chose safety over truth. Nietzsche's philosophy becomes a gentle permission to begin again, to step away from the roles that no longer fit, to let yourself outgrow what once felt necessary, to release the identities that were formed through fear rather than choice. This release can feel like a loss, and in a way, it is. It is the loss of certainty, of familiarity, of the false comfort of predictability. But what emerges in its place is something more grounded, something more honest, something more alive. Nietzsche often spoke of life as a series of deaths and rebirths, not literal ones, but psychological ones. Moments when old beliefs dissolve, when old identities fall away, when the self feels disoriented and uncertain. These moments are uncomfortable. Yet they are also the moments when transformation becomes possible. The person we are becoming begins to take shape as the person we were begins to recede. He encourages us not to resist these transitions. They are signs of growth. They indicate that our life is not stagnating but evolving. When we fear these transitions, we cling to what is familiar even when it suffocates us. When we embrace them, we expand into new capacities we did not know we possessed. In this way, Nietzsche's philosophy is ultimately a philosophy of courage. Not dramatic courage, not the kind celebrated in stories, but the quiet, everyday courage to face oneself, to acknowledge the truth of one's inner life without turning away, to live in alignment with that truth even when it diverges from expectation. This courage allows us to redefine our relationship with others. Instead of seeking validation, we seek connection. Instead of performing, we reveal. Instead of hiding, we share. The relationships that form from this authenticity are rare, but they are profound. They are the relationships in which two people witness each other's becoming without trying to control it. Nietzsche believed that this kind of authenticity creates a more compassionate world. When we understand the difficulty of becoming ourselves, we become gentler with others who are struggling to do the same. We no longer judge based on appearances. We listen more carefully. We see more deeply. We notice the quiet battles others are fighting within themselves. As we move through life with this orientation, we begin to experience meaning not as something distant or abstract, but as something woven into the fabric of our days. It appears in the small decisions that align with our values, in the quiet moments when we feel grounded in ourselves, in the relationships that deepen through honesty, in the courage it takes to continue growing. Meaning becomes less about grand purpose and more about presence. It becomes less about certainty and more about engagement. It becomes less about answers and more about the willingness to live the questions. This willingness, Nietzsche suggests, is the mark of a mature soul, a soul that does not flee from discomfort, that does not cling to illusion, that does not depend on external validation, a soul that trusts the unfolding of its own path. He invites each of us to walk this path with sincerity, not to rush, not to force, but to listen inward and respond with honesty, to allow our inner life to shape our outer life, to become participants in our own emergence. And as we continue this journey, we may discover that the person we are becoming is not someone entirely new, but someone we have always sensed deep within, someone quieter, more present, more aligned, more grounded, someone capable of carrying both joy and sorrow with grace, someone capable of returning to themselves again and again with compassion. Nietzsche's philosophy at its core is an affirmation of life, of struggle, of growth, of possibility, an affirmation of the human capacity to transform, to create, to become, an affirmation that we are not finished, that our story is still unfolding. This affirmation invites you to take a deep breath, to feel the ground beneath you, to listen to the quiet truths that rise within. It invites you to trust your becoming. It invites you to step forward with sincerity, even if the path is unclear. Because the path becomes clear as you walk it. And with each step, each moment of honesty, each act of courage, you move closer to the person you are meant to become. Continuer